Folks, you are looking right now at footage from the Catalyst Machineworks Massive Droner. They took their immensely popular 3-inch racing platform, the Massive Droner, and they redesigned it to hold a Caddx Vista. And that's why the footage that you're looking at right now looks like high definition instead of crappy analog. And make no mistake, this is an amazing quadcopter. They have packed every little bit of performance into 250 grams. Yes, this is sub 250 grams. They have packed every little bit of performance into it without compromising durability, as you see on some sub 250 gram 3-inch quads. But here's the question that we're going to have to answer in this video. When you've got a purebred, hardcore racing machine like the Catalyst Machineworks Massive Droner, does it actually make sense to put DJI in it? Or does that just kind of ruin it? I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Even if you don't fly a Catalyst Machineworks frame for whatever reason, I think you've got to respect and study just how creative and innovative their frame designs are. In a world where, not going to name names, but so many frames kind of just look like a rubber stamp of something else that came before them, maybe one or two little things changed, Catalyst Machineworks is a true innovator. And the Massive Droner is a great example of that. If we look at the changes that have been made to the Massive Droner to fit the Caddx Vista into it, it's really, really cool. Here's the Caddx Vista mounted in the Massive Droner frame, and although it kind of looks like it's part of the flight control stack, it's not. It's actually mounted to this TPU 3D printed part here at the top. The screws come up through and there are nylock nuts holding it on. And that's really a good thing because putting so much weight on the stack, well, number one, having all that weight at the top of the stack would stress the stack screws and potentially bend or break them in a crash. So just be more leverage. But also it could, I guess in theory, it could have a damping effect on the vibration. I don't know. But it makes a lot of sense to me that they mounted it up on top here. That's pretty freaking clever. The one thing I don't like is that in order to get at the USB port on the Vista, you've actually got to take one of these screws out and lift this carbon piece out of the way. You can just see the USB port right here. And I'm a firm believer that USB ports should always be accessible because you're going to update the DJI updates their firmware all the time. It's not the end of the world that you've got to pull a screw out, but it's a little annoying. And I guess I see why they did it that way, but I want everything. I don't want to have to make compromises. In the original Massive Droner, these side plates were a single piece that went all the way across. But in order to accommodate the width of the Vista without having to raise the height of the quad or do anything that might affect its handling, they've simply spread it out using these standoffs and these 3D printed pieces. The result is honestly pretty elegant. Like, you've got to wonder whether you've compromised strength a little bit by not having a single solid piece through here. These screws may turn out to be a weak spot, but given the amount of stress that 3-inch quadcopters tend to experience, I think it's probably going to be okay. The bottom plate is a single piece, which is going to increase strength. All of the corners are radiused as they should be for strength. There's no sort of sharp edges or anything like that. It's pretty typical in quads of this size to have a single piece bottom plate. In fact, I'm not sure I can think of any interchangeable arms 3-inch quads. If you can, let me know in the comments. I'd actually be really curious to hear about it. Like most Catalyst Machineworks designs, there is a strut across the front, and in frontal impacts, that's going to help take some of the stress and help protect the arms. The front strut is not optional. It is optional on some Catalyst Machineworks quads, but on this one, the front strut is going to be mandatory because the side plates link into the front strut here, and so it kind of holds the whole thing together. You could choose to remove the back strut if you wanted to save just a little bit of weight, but I don't know why you would. It's not that much weight, is it? Yeah, I know. They're probably using these button head screws just because they came with the motors, and it just saves just a tiny bit of money, I guess. The side plates lock into the front strut, as we've seen already, and they also lock into the bottom plate here. And they lock in from the front so that in a frontal impact, they'll be pressed backwards into the bottom plate and into the strut, and everything will sort of lock in and like be stronger. This is the back of the quadcopter where the side plate locks into the bottom plate via a captive nut. And we can see here that the captive nut, well, it's a little difficult to see, but there is a washer here. I've seen a lot of these builds done, and they'll machine out the carbon just big enough to hold the nut, and then they'll just rely on the nut to cinch everything together. The addition of a washer is a very, very nice, and again, just a thoughtful touch. Probably cost them a fraction of a penny, but it does make this a little more secure. Now, Catalyst Machineworks built this quad for me, and they don't just do that for big shot YouTubers. They'll do it for you too. They have a service where they'll just build the quad and send it to you in exchange for money, obviously. And the build quality, I've always been pleased with the build quality on their quads. We can just take a look here at these solder joints for the ESC and see that they're pretty clean. They're smooth. They're round. The wires are cut just to length. The solder joints here on the flight controller are also just really well done. It's a very well built quad. I really like that Catalyst Machineworks camera mounting lets you slide the camera forward and backward so that the camera can be placed just barely inside of the front plates and get the maximum amount of protection possible. The downside of this approach is that the camera angle is only held by friction. Now, I've had other Catalyst Machineworks frames, and I haven't had a problem with the camera moving in a crash or anything. It's held in pretty tight. And in fact, you can... That's surprisingly tight. Have they locked that in there somehow? Like, there's no second screw. Oh, there we go. It'll move. So it's really locked in there, and it doesn't really go anywhere, and it's a pretty nice design. Every camera is going to have a slightly different lens focal length. So if you just set those holes for one camera, another camera may be sunk back too far and you're seeing the frame plates, or sticking out too far and the camera lens is potentially going to get damaged. This one lets you get it perfect every time. Catalyst Machineworks has mounted the receiver for me up on top, and presumably that's where it's intended to go. On the one hand, this does make it really easy to get at the bind button, which I always like. But on the other hand, it does stick up a little, and it sure seems to me like that's a place where it could get bashed. Presumably, they've done a lot of crash testing on this and have found that not to be a problem, but I don't know, especially with the UFL connectors up here sticking out. This to me seems like one of the weaker points of the design, and it seems like I don't know where else I would put the receiver, because anywhere else we might put it, the bind button probably wouldn't be as accessible, and to me that would be the bigger sin. There's just not, I don't know, like back here somewhere, or I don't know. I guess it's probably okay, but it does stand out to me. There's a really nice 3D printed piece here on the back to hold the Caddx antenna and the receiver antennas. I don't know who's doing Catalyst Machineworks design, their 3D design, but they do some really, really intricate and creative stuff. So it holds it in. You can see it's got two pieces here to lock in the angle. It locks into this standoff here, and it locks into that standoff to hold the angle. The 2.4 gigahertz receiver antennas are quite short, and they're not going to get all up in the end in the props. That's very nice. And if you had crossfire, I'm not sure you'd want to use this exact antenna mount. They probably would. There's probably another way to mount it with the Immortal T. I'm sure Catalyst Machineworks has taken into account crossfire, since they're very, very big into the racing scene. One note of criticism, if you will, is that Catalyst Machineworks doesn't publish their STL files. So if you have a 3D printer at home, you will not be able to print these. You have to buy them from Catalyst. I guess it's annoying, and as a person with a 3D printer, check out my 3D printing content, link in the video description to my 3D printing playlist. As a person who has a 3D printer, I wish I could print this stuff at home, but considering the amount of work that Catalyst Machineworks puts into designing these parts, I guess I don't begrudge them wanting to make a little bit of money off of them. The XT60 comes straight out the back, and it is pre-installed with a capacitor. This is a relatively weak way of mounting the capacitor. It does have some cables here. It's not just the naked legs of the capacitor. That is very thoughtful, and it is heat shrinked all the way up to the capacitor. Catalyst Machineworks doesn't screw around when they build a quad. Putting the capacitor on the XT60 is the least amount of filtering you can have. The closer to the ESC it is, the better. And yes, these wires do make a small amount of difference. I prefer to have that capacitor mounted up on the inside here. It'll be a little more protected from damage. As you're handling the XT60, you can wiggle the capacitor and kind of move it around. And it sure seems like there's enough room in there to mount it there if you wanted to. The other thing about the power cord that stands out to me is that there is no strain relief. If you eject a battery, it's going to go flying. It's going to tug on this XT60, and eventually it can rip the pads right off the ESC. I always want to see some strain relief on my builds. And given that we've got this brace right here, or we could strain relief it to maybe one of these side plates, because they're probably not going to go anywhere. All we have to do is just take a zip tie and put it around here, and then we've got some strain relief, and it takes the stress when the battery ejects. Here's the other thing that jumps out to me that I would probably change about this build. These are the flight control stack screws, and they appear to be nylon screws. Yeah, I've had quadcopters with nylon stack screws before. They always shear off. Always. Now, I guess maybe you could argue that being a 3-inch and being under 250 grams, it is lightweight. It's going to have less stress. It's got a 20 millimeter board. Maybe that's not an issue. We also have the braces here, which are somewhat preventing this bottom plate from actually making contact with the ground. So if we do some kind of a skid on an abrasive surface, you could argue that these plastic screw heads aren't going to get sheared off. I'm going to guess that they used plastic to save weight, but that just stands out to me as that's going to break. Your flight controller is going to be flapping in the wind, and you're going to have problems. I would probably swap these out for metal. I mean, use aluminum if you're concerned about weight. How much weight are you really saving? The other question that I have that isn't really easy to answer is, where do I put the battery pad? Because it's going to need to be narrow enough to fit inside these screw holes, unless I just want to cover the screws up and rip the battery pad off whenever I need to get at the flight control stack. I guess we could put a thick battery pad here to clear these screw heads, and it'll just maybe there's not a ton of places to put a battery pad. I guess we don't need a lot of battery pad. Just enough to keep the battery from digging into the screws. My last little piece of grip battery pad. My last little piece. My precious. I could just buy more. Yeah, that'll probably be okay. Now it's time to do a flight test on this quad, and in order to try to really fly it as it's intended to be flown, like I'm more of a freestyle pilot, this is definitely a racing quad. So I gave myself a little race course. You'll see me start flying it in just a second, and I tried to fly it as fast as I could. And the short version is that this quad is way faster and more powerful than I'm capable of taking advantage of. On this straight that you just saw me flew, I should be full throttle, but I didn't even have time to get to full throttle before I had to make the next turn, and I would have just blown out the next turn. You're probably never going to see me hit full throttle on any of this stuff. As far as durability goes, I'm really impressed with the more Massive Droner. Catalyst Machineworks has always done a really good job of building durable airframes, but oftentimes those airframes, like if you look at the Banggood, they're pretty heavy. But this one strikes a really good sweet spot between being lightweight. There are lighter 3-inch quads, but as long as you're under 250 grams, do you really care? And you give up a lot of durability when you go to those other sort of ultra lightweight quads. This thing is a really, really livable. You can really live with it, because while you're racing and while you're practicing, as you're crashing, you're just picking it up, you maybe straighten a prop, and you're back up in the air again. And that's not true for a lot of other 3-inch builds under 250 grams. But the thing that we have to talk about, even though it might be a little bit uncomfortable, is the Caddx Vista. And I understand why Catalyst Machineworks wanted to put a Caddx Vista on this quad, because DJI is awesome. I mean, just look at that. Wouldn't you rather be flying with this image than with like a crackly analog image? A lot of people, the answer is obviously yes. But the one place where DJI is the weakest is in racing. And the most basic reason for that is that race timing and DVR systems are not set up to work with the DJI system. Yes, the lap timing systems can work with DJI, but I guarantee you, if you show up at International Open or some big race with the DJI quad, I don't think any of them are able to do that just because they can't DVR your signal and they can't do any review if there's any question over, like if you missed a gate or anything. The other thing is that at the highest levels of racing, the variable latency of the DJI system is just a total no-go. It only changes from, say, 25 to 35 milliseconds, but when you are racing all out on pure muscle memory, that is enough to screw you up. Oh, but that's not why I crashed. I just suck. So that brings us to the end of the video, and as always the question, should you buy it? And I keep having to remind myself of my guiding principle in reviewing products, which is don't say this is a good product or this is a bad product. I almost never do that. Ask the question, who's going to love this product and who's going to hate it? And then tell you enough about the product so that you can figure out which one of those people you are. And when I first got this quad, I thought, how amazing! A high-definition, sub-250 gram, 3-inch racing quad from Catalyst Machineworks. What more could you ask for? And as I flew it, I realized a high-performance racing quad shouldn't have Caddx Vista in it. DJI is just not for high-performance racing today. So, if you are a high-performance, highly competitive 3-inch racer, you don't need me to tell you that DJI is not for you. So then who is this for? I've really loved flying this thing. My skills as a racer are not to the point where that little tenth of 10 millisecond difference in latency makes or breaks my highly precise flying. This was way more enjoyable to fly than an analog quad because high definition DJI is more enjoyable to fly. I'm sorry guys. I love analog. I still fly analog. It has its benefits. This video proves that there are places where analog is still king, but DJI is just more pleasant to fly. And I think that's the person for whom this is a really good quad. I've flown a lot of not a lot. I've flown more than a few 3-inch racing quads, and this is a really good one. It's heavier, but it's more durable. The more I think about this quad, the picture that comes to my mind is like, it's not like a stripped down sports car with no air conditioning and no radio. It's a high performance vehicle with a little bit of creature comforts and a little bit of reduction in performance. It's still incredibly high performance, but it's got DJI in it. And you might not take it, you could take it to a race. You could take it to your weekend race at your local club. You're probably not going to take it to like International Open. But that's okay, because it's a blast to fly. It's a really good frame. And oh, by the way, you don't have to there's an analog version of this quad, just the regular Massive Droner. That's freaking amazing. Links to all of this stuff down in the video description. Catalyst Machineworks pushes the edge so much. They push the bounds of innovation so much. And sometimes I love what they do. And sometimes I'm like, what did you do here? And I guess when you push the edge as much as they do, the product that you make isn't going to be right for everybody. It's not just going to be like, everyone should buy this, it's amazing. But that's okay, because it means you're making a product that actually is doing something exceptional. And for the right person, this is a really freaking good quad. Links in the video description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy flying. Do you see this baby? Isn't he cute? Hit the subscribe button. Join my Patreon. Use my affiliate links. Or just keep watching videos. That's better than nothing.
Go, go, gaga, subscribe to my daddy.